Recording in progress.
We have received from Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2016 January that you have set up your national registry. We have received a note bubble, and in the note bubble it says, on a provisional basis and until such time Chile establish a permanent space agency. So if you're going to build this, establish a permanent space agency, we are now taking it for granting, according to the 2016, that it would be moved to the National Space Agency if this is not yet discussed, or if it has been discussed that it will be maintained by Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We'd be happy to receive an update from you, but this is what we understand. And every country that let us know where they have, who is maintaining, and if they have set up the national registry, we receive a note bubble from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and we distribute it to all member states so that every country knows, and we can keep a transparency on information sharing. This is also in the public webpage, so you can also Google easily. But allow me to talk about creating a national registry. I know you have been maintaining it and have it, but since you're in a stage where you are growing your space activities, it's for the time being. Sorry, let me also explain. If you go into this webpage, you'll see that the 7 satellites are, out of 7, most of them are governmental satellites, meaning I think it's the Air Force FACH satellites, and some of them are from the University of Chile. But as you grow, you might have industries coming up and other university coming up, or you might have other foreign, you might want to invite foreign countries in your country and grow the space economy. In that sense, you might have other actors. So these things, you have to think about it. And this presentation is just to give you some things to consider for the future, what to do with your national registry. So national registry, you're more or less required to do it under the registration of convention and to set up an appropriate registry. But it also is asking under the Outer Space Treaty to set up a national registration. So what is the importance? What is the core factor of having a national registry? It is that once you have it in the national registry, we consider that you have jurisdiction and control over it. It's not actually, when sometimes it gets misunderstood, but having registered in the UN doesn't trigger the jurisdiction and control. It is always from your national registry. So when you say this is our object, first, we expected it to be already in your national registry. So this is the key point. And I have to also want to mention that that is why it's important for all countries to maintain national registry. And it's not just the registration convention that triggers it. So even those countries that has not yet ratified the registration convention, please consider for future activities to setting up a national registry. Now, if you're going to set up the national registry, would you want to be obligated by law or decree, let's say, or like regulation? That is also up to your country, because if you do set up a law, it's very difficult to quickly update it in the aspect of growing the scope of your space activity. So some countries prefer to regulate this obligation, let's say, of registering to the national registry by regulations or even white papers. The things is upon your country's flexibility. So sorry, I always forget to change the slides, but since you can't see it so much, I think it's better that you see it later on when you have it in hand. But another thing is, how do you, for the time being, collect the information of satellites? So for the time being, I think Chile has only 7 satellites, but if you're having industries, it might be more than 20 or 50 or 100 per year. You have to think of the growth that is coming up and what do you want to collect? This is something you have to decide, and registration convention says not more than the content of each registry and the condition under which is maintained shall be determined by the state of registry concerned. So meaning you have the full power to decide what you can collect from the owner of the satellites. And you also have to identify which object is going to be registered. So space object is not clearly defined, unfortunately. If you look into the treaties, you'll find the definition of space objects, but in the definition itself, it says it's a space object or a part of space object. So it is not well defined. So in that sense, you have to probably figure out a definition of space objects or make it clear what you want it to be recorded. Now, I will go into a little bit more detail later on this point, but also what you need to discuss is when are objects launched when do you need those objects to be registered? So it could be for international registry, you need to register it once it's in the orbit. However, for national registry, you can already request to be pre-registered before launch, which could be a way out, or once it's in orbit also. This is up to you, but please note that once a launch is failed and you haven't registered the space objects, what are you gonna do with that object that is up there and you still want to maintain control, but it's not registered? Do you do retroactive registration or not? These things are more for lawyers to answer, but it's something important to consider the timing. What is convenient for you and when to start that process. So when you have another thing I have to talk is what is the form of the national registry? Now, for the time being, maybe it's paper-based, I guess. I don't know. Somebody might be able to answer later on, but you can do it digital. You could do it paper-based. You could do it hybrid. It's up to you to facilitate the process, considering the growing number of space objects in your country. You could have the national registry public. Some countries do have it public. Some countries have it classified. You could also, depending on the nature of the space object, you could choose both case-by-case basis. Also, the form of the national registry could be only in Spanish, or you could choose both Spanish and English. There is some countries that just use the official language, but has guidelines in English how to put it there because they want to invite foreign countries to grow their space economy. This is also something very interesting to think about. And then how do you receive this information is also one process you have to think about, whether you're fine with emails or you will want to have an official web page where owners have to first register themselves, and through the web page platform, they register this information. These are the process you also need to consider for future. And then national designators. This is also a way to control and keep archiving the national space objects in your country. How you number them is also one thing you have to think about. For the time being, if I understand correctly, Chile doesn't have a clear national designator, because when we receive information, we sometimes have the name of the satellite in the national designator. But it's okay for the time being because you have everything under control. But when it expands, you might want to start numbering all the industry or private sector or university CubeSats, and how to number them. You classify these in who the stakeholder is, or you can have everything in one numbering law. It's also up to your country to decide. So I'm going to again to a little bit on the definition of space objects. So object launched into outer space is whatever has to be registered to the UN. And I said that it is very difficult to understand the definition, because here it says the term space object includes components, parts of space object, as well as its launch vehicle and parts thereof. So, and space object in return agreement, it's also said space object or its components parts. And it's really like, the question is, what is space object in the end? There's no clear definition at the time being. And we sometimes receive in the committee work whether we should need a clear definition of space objects. But for the time being, what all the member states agree that maybe we don't need it, because we still do not have a big problem not having a clear space objects definition. So in that sense, member states prefer having their own version of space object definition, so that it is easier for them to govern their activities inside their country. Now, what you have to think when you say set up the registry, you also want to think whether you're going to register a non-functional object. And it is also space debris is one of the issues that you have to think about. And this also, when you define the space object terminology, this is something you also want to think about, because maybe you might want to register the space debris. There's a tendency in these days, after the adoption of long-term sustainability guidelines about the space, that there are more member states that started registering their space debris in terms of launch vehicles, first stage rockets, second stage rockets, and such. And it could be that you might want to consider this as space objects as well in your national definition. And again, last point, registering launch vehicles is also a tendency that we have been monitoring. So I know at this stage, Chile is not yet having a launching capability, but in the future, you might want to consider it. And when it happens, you might need to also consider whether registering this or not. So it's food for thought to share with you. I've already mentioned of the point in time of national registration, but I want to recap of what this national registration, what is the main part? It's just that when you register it in the national registry, it affects your jurisdiction and control over objects. So the earlier, maybe the better in terms of legal simplicity, but you might have internal procedures. So please consider when you want to do it, before the launch or after the launch. And when you find someone that forgot to register, do you accept retroactive registration so that you can still claim it that it's your space object? These things is very legal, so I leave it up to the lawyers to consider this point. Another thing, Christina has mentioned the definition of launching states. Registration Convention requests one launching state, out of all the launching state, one launching state to register the satellite. So when it happens, sometimes you have two countries registering one object, and UN has to approach both countries. Which one of you would be the official country of registry? So in that sense, they haven't coordinated yet before registering. And this, we have to ask you to consider it when you are going to be partnering up in launching a satellite in the future. I think the FACH has been launched from Baikonur, and mainly you are partnering up with Russian launching capabilities, but I think that was super clear because it's a military satellite owned by Air Force. I think there was no need for discussion who will register it. But in the future, when you have universities collaborating, partnering up worldwide, then you might have to discuss in a governmental level, who is going to register this satellite? So this is something you have to bear in mind. And now I have maintenance of national registry. Who maintains it? Is it the operator who maintains it or regulator who maintains it? Meaning who gives actively the role to update the information? I think it's for the time being in Chile, it's crystal clear. It's the Ministry of Foreign Affairs who is the ministry in charge of maintaining national registry because it is informed as such to UN, but things might change, and this is something you might want to discuss in the future. But when you have lots of satellites, you have to, how do you approach them? To the private sectors, is it the Ministry of Foreign Affairs who needs to approach private sectors to check on a periodical basis what is happening to your satellite, what is the status, has it been transferred to another country? Ownership has been transferred to another country. These are the questions that rises, but you might want them to inform you, thinking of the workload coming over. So in that sense, when you set up a regulation to do that, you might want to already put that in so that you constantly get it, and you just need to regularly somehow check up on an annual basis or biannual basis if nothing has changed. And should private sectors, for example, forgot to inform you, then you would also, it means that you would also not be able to inform the UN registry the updated situation. So you can consider a penalty to those who forgot to inform you on the updated status. But it's again up to your country how you want to make this a good practice and best implemented. So let's see. We have also how should the national registry be maintained? It's also the procedures. Would you want it again to be registered? Just update the information by email? Do you want it to be in a platform? these things it might be best to consider and find out in an early stage before your government will be have too much space objects by industry. So better to be prepared, well prepared before it grows. But you still have time, and this is something that just a food for thought once again. Last but not least, some countries do have registration linked to authorization process. So when industry wants to launch a satellite, they provide a form on requesting licensing of their space activities or authorization of their space activities. And in that form, as an annex, they already request for a pre-registration form. So this is one way to also decrease your workload to approach industries and universities. So this could be a way to do it. And I'm just saying could be all the time, because in the end, it's up to your government how many people you would be hiring to do all this and how many do you expect space object to be launched. So it's about finding out the future balance of the workforce and the actual space objects that you need to supervise in the end. And for that, I have mentioned so much of possibilities, and it's a bit confusing. But you're lucky today because tomorrow we have Germany's experience, how they do it, why they choose to do that. And he is here, Martin is here to share with you a great expertise and experience how it's well done. So I leave it here and thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Yukiko, por esta última presentación. Sin duda, y a modo de referencias de Cancillería, agradecemos también todo el trabajo que UNOOSA nos ha prestado justamente en el registro de objetos, y gracias a eso es que tenemos el récord del 100%. Así que lo agradecemos. Sin duda, dentro de la política nacional espacial se van a tener que tocar muchos temas. Uno de ellos va a tener que volver a replantearse el tema de registro de objetos, que es parte de, como explicaba Yukiko, del crecimiento de la industria espacial que se va teniendo a lo largo de los años. Sin duda, también hacemos un llamado a las institucionalidades nacionales, tanto de la academia, el sector privado, la industria, que justamente cualquier duda que tengan y si van a lanzar satélites, se acerquen a Cancillería para hacer el registro de objetos. Como hemos visto durante todos estos días, o sea, durante toda esta mañana, perdón, uno de los temas más importantes es justamente los objetos que están en órbita, cómo seguimos su órbita en sí para evitar colisiones y tener además un espacio mucho más seguro y de utilización completa. Con esto damos por terminado el día de hoy. Vamos a dar espacio a un par de preguntas, pero agradecemos desde ya la participación de quienes han estado online siguiéndonos y además de quienes están presenciales. Dejo abierto el micrófono para preguntas finales.
Sorry, I thought it was a bit too detailed and boring, so I didn't expect the questions. Apologies.
Thank you, Mrs. Yukiko, for your presentation. I have many questions, in fact, but I'll just ask one. For the case of different rocket stages when launched or parts, are they needed to be added to the registry before in case, well, a space object isn't clearly defined, as you said? So I was wondering if rocket parts sometimes orbit around Earth orbit are needed to be in the registry, or it's just for satellites and these are expected to fall on Earth soon and are not registered.
Thank you very much for your question. It depends on how long you expect the rocket to be out there, let's say, because the more it's out there, it increases the risk of collisions. So in that sense, in the long-term sustainability guidelines, we promote as much as space object to be registered, meaning even non-functional objects. And that is why we have been receiving increasing amount of national registries in even for space debris and rocket launch stages that are already there. And I will also mention this in my next presentation tomorrow on the safety operation, because rocket launch stages, if there's still like some propulsion and energy remaining, and increases the amount of explosion by itself, even if there's no collision. If it's the collision, it's also awful. So that is why it is considered to be better, but there is no such things as need or should be. So it's up to your country to decide and discuss what is best and what you consider as being a responsible space actor to preserve the sustainability of outer space. So I can only leave it to that. And yes, so I look forward what will be discussed inside the government. Thank you.
¿Espacio para una pregunta más? Bueno, entonces, antes de cerrar, sí vamos a hacer un par de anuncios para el día de mañana. Esperamos de nuevo la transmisión comenzar a las 9 de la mañana, mismo lugar. Y para quienes nos siguen de manera virtual, recordar que todas las preguntas, por favor, dirigirlas al correo espacio@facch.mil.cl. Y para quienes están presenciales, les recuerdo la tarea que nos dejó Rosana de leer el ejercicio que se va a comenzar el día de mañana. Muchísimas gracias por la asistencia y nos vemos mañana en este mismo lugar.